Perfect. Thanks so much, Jasmine. So, just a quick little background on myself. I'm Francis. I'm one of the automations optimizers here at Filevine. You may know my colleague, Susie Lewis. The two of us work most frequently on all things Workato and a little bit with some other automation platforms. So everything that I'm going to show you today is best practice and recommended by Filevine because I got my start in automations at Filevine when I worked on their automations team there. So hopefully we can have a little reassurance there that we're all headed in the right direction with Workato. And then the goal of today is really just to help everyone, if you have Workato, to feel more comfortable navigating in it, whether or not you're super good at building automations, show you some tips and tricks for organizing, navigating, really getting the most out of it, as well as, talking through some automations, like types of things that it can do if you're not familiar with automations in general. As Jasmine said, please feel free to throw out some questions if there are really specific questions about like a certain automation that's not working, we might want to, connect with you afterwards. But if it's just general kind of automation questions, how can I think through some of this stuff? Feel free to shout those out. I'd love to answer live on the chat or live in the video. So let me get my screen shared here. Dive in. Awesome. So the first thing I'm going to go through kind of high level very quickly, because I'm sure we have some people that already know Workato and what it's used for, but it is used to manage any and all of your organization's automated workflows. So examples of this could include copying information from one project to its related projects. You can do things like auto calculating statute dates. You can turn sections on and off as you progress through your project's phases. All of that stuff that's just like that one extra click for your staff member and can be done automatically within FileVine. And this is not just for, PI or really certain project types. I do these automations for all clients. For insurance defense, I have something that will alert them if their attorney makes an offer, that goes over the amount discussed with the adjuster. All sorts of things that can really be explored in all sorts of practice areas. So I'm going to dive into Workato up at the on my screen here, app.workato.com, just in case you've forgotten how to navigate there. That's where we're going to be headed. And the one thing that I always want to show is something that I think gets overlooked a lot, which is the operations hub. So if you signed up for automations, you probably spoke to Filevine and they talked to you about task usage and how many tasks you might need throughout the year. That can all be managed right here in your operations hub. And I'm realizing I'm on our sandbox, which we can't see the task, but we can. It's right here. They move it around a little bit. So here's where you can kind of keep track of the tasks being used and project out. So I could see how many tasks I've used in the last 30 days. I could even do a custom range for year to year and make that determination myself. Hey, is the task tier that I'm on when I first purchased this still working for me? Do I need to flex up if I want to add a bunch more automations? Or am I really not using all the tasks that I thought I was using? Maybe I can talk about flexing down. Um, so this is definitely something, again, on the blue bar menu, you're going to look at Operations Hub, and it will take you into here with how many tasks that you've used. Again, this is our sandbox, so it's a little bit different, but for everyone else, it should show you also when your tasks roll over, when they're renewed. So you can really keep track of that and know how to plan accordingly for your automation work. The other thing that I'd want to show here before we kind of dig in is just this sidebar on the left here. Really, I run into kind of the most issues with clients that aren't sure if they have a lot of automations and aren't sure what they're doing. I run into problems if things aren't well organized. So if I come in and I work on a client's automations in Workato, I will make separate projects. I'll put everything that I build in a project normally called Bind Skills or Bind Skills Created. So you know everything that we've built for you. And if you ever had to chat with someone, file vine support, if you ever had to chat with another partner about something we've built, you can see those easily. And then within that project, a lot of times I'll even create like subfolders here. Maybe you have a personal injury and a mass tort. You have two different practice groups. Those are going to be different automations. So we'll separate those out into folders. So any questions? I'm also going to try to keep an eye on the chat as well. And so again, this will all be, you can create those first larger projects under here, and then inside of your projects, you can have, different folders within there. Another organization tip that I love to share, and this is going to be a do as I say, not as I do, because I'm not always the best at doing it in the sandbox, but is have a naming convention for your automations. So if I pop into here to some of my demos, you can see, especially like up top here, we have a very specific naming convention for ones that I build for clients. Normally, I use something like section, function, trigger. So the section that the automation starts in, the function, what it does, and the trigger, what kicks that off. That way, if I have 5 different automations that are working in my case summary section, I can just come in here and start searching case summary, or I can search intake, and I can pull up any and all automations that are dealing with that. Again, it might seem like silly organizational tips, but so many clients that I help out, a lot of issues stem from not really knowing what's turned on, not really knowing what automations are running within which sections. And if they're sort of vaguely named, that can cause issues because then you have to click into them and try to understand what each one is doing. All right. Any questions so far? Not seeing any. Perfect. Then let's dive into a little bit of customization and housekeeping within an automation. So inside each of these, if I click onto this is where I would see how to build them, change them. But before we get into actually editing them, I want to show something important here. This is the job table. And a lot of times when you're inside of Workato, it will look very different. Hang on. It might look just something like, see if I can find, let's do that. It might look like something like this, right? This is a really good way to see if your job table has been optimized or not. It'll have the date that the automation ran and just like a whole bunch of letters and numbers, timestamps that really aren't that useful and don't tell you anything more. Using Workato's customization here, if an automation is off, just show this real quick. You can actually pull pieces of data from your automation into the job table. So I can just click there, customize job report. So I'm pulling the project that the automation triggered in, as well as if there were any errors, which there weren't in this last one I ran, but if there were, I could show that. You could also pull things like the primary of the project, anything that you think would be useful if your automation is like totaling amounts or something. You could show the newly totaled automation here. And again, if you're an admin at your firm, or if you sometimes get questions about automations, having the project number in there is going to save you so much trouble. I guarantee you at some point, someone's going to say, hey, that automation didn't work in that project I just ran in. And if you have a job table that looks like this, you're going to have to click every single one. There's only 2, but some firms that might run thousands of times. You're going to have to click every job on that day until you find the right project that it ran in so you can see what happened. As opposed to here, where you could just search the job by project ID. If you ask the person, okay, what was the project ID of the affected project? And it will pull up all those jobs for you. So again, just working a little smarter and faster and investigating so you can see if there was an error or not. Another super important thing that I'll show too is versions and version history. Some clients that I work with have staff that sort of tag teams. So they might have multiple people in their Workato. which is great until somebody goes on vacation, someone makes a change to a recipe, and then it's all wrong and different, and it takes a little while to figure out what happened. So with this version history, you can always see who changed what and when. So for example, you can see that I actually changed the job table here. That's what that schema change is. And before, both myself and my colleague Susie were in here making edits. You can even add comments for what you changed and maybe why. I do this if Susie and I ever work together on a client and I have to edit one of her automations. I'll say, here's what I changed and why we had to change it. So that way she's never confused about why automations change, from one day to the next there. All right. So those are just some kind of rapid fire best practices. You have your operations hub you should check out. Make sure your automations are organized into folders and projects there, have a naming convention, and then just check out the job tables and the version histories too as well, and to keep these up to date. This is something too, not to plug too much, but something that if you work with Vine Skills for your automation needs, we take care of just out of the box. Everything will be named, organized, your job tables are customized. We'll even give you a starter automation to sort of use as a copy paste so you don't have to remember to copy that or edit this job table every time, for example. All right, who is ready to dive into an automation? So let me see. One thing too, if you haven't done a Workato training or if you're just kind of dipping your toe into what automations can do here, I'll probably use the term recipe and automation interchangeably. Workato calls automations recipes. I don't know why. I guess they like to cook something. But just kind of keep that in mind if you hear me using that term. That's why. All right. So I'm going to go into my automation. If it's off like this one is, you'll notice I can just click right into the editor here and then edit. And let's talk a little bit about triggers for automations because these can sometimes really be like the most, I would say, skipped over, but also one of the most important parts of your automation is the trigger. And when I say trigger, I'm really just talking about what tells the automation to go and do the thing that it has to do, right? What's going to tell my automation to create a note in the activity feed or create a collection item in a certain section. So when you come in here, you'll always get started with the trigger and it will prompt you to pick the object type, right? Which there are only a couple. For this example, let's say I want to do it when intake is saved. So it would be form and updated. But I want to call our attention really to why some of the more important parts of the trigger, which is the trigger conditions down here. So the first thing, and if you saw, I think we might have posted a little like tip on this, a little kind of sneak peek, is this project ID limiter here. If you take one thing away from the training and you're planning on playing around in Workato later, let this be the one thing, which is to safely test and play around with your automations. You're going to want to add what's called like this trigger condition here, but a test project, right? So I have one, I have my Black Panther Iron Man. I think actually in this one I used different one. And you can do if project ID, which you would pull from the first step, equals, and then I can just pick a test project in my org that I know I can mess around to add data. And it's not like a real project importantly, copy that project ID and paste that right there. And what this is doing is saying only trigger this automation if I'm inside of my test project. That way you can mess up all you want. You can make all the mistakes. You can play around, move things around without having to worry, am I affecting my live data? Or like, did I just mess up on an actual project, right? You always want to safely test your automations before you just turn them on for your whole org there. And this test project criteria can really help you but it also makes you feel confident that you're not going to mess anything up, which will, just allow you to feel more comfortable playing around with the different steps of the automations and running tests and things like that. So definitely make sure that you have a test project. If you only have one in your org, that's fine. I normally like to use a totally separate project just for automations, but feel free to use any kind of current test or training projects that you might have already. Any questions about that so far, or how I got to the screen I'm on, about triggers in general? Awesome. And let me just talk a little bit about things that I commonly see used as triggers. So I commonly see like an intake section being saved, a collection item being created or even updated. When a project phase changes, that's a really popular trigger. And then one of the biggest triggers are action buttons. So those same buttons that you can push in your template to trigger a task flow, we can just set those up as empty buttons, not connected to a certain task flow. Just empty trigger buttons. You push that and it tells your automation, go and, mirror some data, go and create a collection item, go and change the phase or create a note or fill in a date field. All sorts of options there. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the second trigger condition here too, which is just make sure that your triggers are as specific as possible, right? If I didn't have this one here, all this is saying is anytime any section is saved, any static section is saved in my file line, trigger this automation. That is going to trigger all the time. That is very likely not what you want to happen. And it can use up tasks that you might not want it to use up if it doesn't need to be triggering that often. So if I just add one thing here that says also make sure that the section selector is intake, now it's saying only trigger this if an intake section is saved. And we've automatically cut down on a ton of potential triggers there. All right. Any questions there? Perfect. So next I'm going to show just some actions. So in this is the sample automation where I'm just mirroring a statute of limitations, just really for demo. I don't want us to get too caught up in this, but if you let's add a new step here so we can take a look and we'll pick FileVine. Now you saw a couple, depending on whether you're connecting to Workato with a PAT, one of the new access tokens, or an API key will depend on which one of these you choose. This is something that usually is set up for you when you purchase like Workato through FileVine. They take care of getting that connection established for you. So you don't have to worry about like picking the right one. Like I just did, it should be in there for you. We just test a bunch of stuff in our sandbox. One of the things that I found really helpful when I was first learning Workato was just clicking on a new step, going to this action and taking a look at all of the different actions I can take with automation in FileVine. And it's a lot, right? This is a long list. You can see my scroll bar. We're not even halfway through. So this can be a little bit overwhelming, but I just scrolled through the whole thing, kind of looked at what each one did, and then I started searching for, common things, right? So, okay, I have a collection section. What can I do with automation in collection sections? I can create items, delete items. I can just get an item to maybe copy the data. I can get a whole section's list of collection items, and then I can update them or mirror data to them. And so I said, great, what can I do with contacts, right? Contact singular. And I can see all the actions that I can take there. So this is a really great place to start. Again, if you're a firm admin, or even if you're just someone that has access to the Workato and environment and you're getting questions about, what can I do with a section? What can I do with my like intake section, for example? Static sections are a little bit different. They're going to be called forms. That's another little just tip and a little bit of a language change in Workato. Any static section, intake, case summary, those kinds of sections are going to be called forms in Workato. But I can see that I can get a section, I can update one. That's also pulling in this conflict one because of my search. Now, depending on your background, I don't come from a super technical background. I started at a law firm, moved to Filevine, obviously a tech company where I was taught Workato by another manager there. But some people, even on this call, might have a really technical background and they might be more comfortable viewing this in a more technical way. So you can always look at Filevine's API documentation. We can drop this link for you as well if you're not familiar with it. But it also has that same list of actions that you can take, right? I can see everything that I can do with a project, just in a different way with the like responses, the headers, and the body there. Again, I will say if you're like me and you're not from as technical a background, this was super overwhelming at first. I didn't understand the way it was laid out. So I was a lot more comfortable just kind of cruising around in Workato and looking at the different actions there, typing, project, what can I do with a project? What can I do with the teams? Until I had a good grasp on what each thing was asking me for. Now I can kind of look at the documentation and help myself there. All right, a lot of info there. I'm just gonna pause. And you know what, actually, let me just grab this. So in case anyone was interested in looking at this further, I'll pop that API documentation into the chat there. All right. And I'm not seeing any questions coming through, so I'm just going to keep on going forward. So let me pop into this actual automation that I had set up. Just going to move things around a little bit. And so this is a real life example. This is something that I've set up somewhat frequently for clients where they have an intake section where they might be just grabbing some provider names really quickly. And it can be a little bit annoying to flip back and forth between intake and your meds or treatment section, create a collection item, and go back, to intake to take the rest of the intake. Sometimes you can just list them in a text box, but if you want to save yourself some time, I'll create essentially a shell collection item with just the provider name. So then they can go back in later when they start contacting providers and get, amounts, dates of treatment, that kind of add the records, everything there. So let's actually just see this work kind of start to finish. Let me make sure it's on just so we can get an idea of what we're doing. And I'll add one more. Actually, before I do this, let's take a look at the medicals just so you can see what it looks like before. So I have two, I have the Hulk and Black Widow. Let me go to my intake. And I'm going to add one more of our to the hospital. And then I can, so this one's on a button. So I could have this be on a button, which is easy. Or I could even have it on the save of a section, depending. We would just want to work with you a little bit there to make sure we're not duplicating anything. A button's really nice too, because then you get all the timestamped info, who pushed this and when, and you can always rerun it just by simply resetting the button if there were more providers later on that you added. And so in Workato, here's what I'm talking about with the job customization. I can see that it ran already, it actually finished, so we'll go take a look at the results in a second, but I can see that I ran it in my test project there and what time it ran. And so I'll do a quick refresh. And now I can see that I have these two kind of, again, shell items ready and waiting for me to add some info there whenever I have that new info. That's a time saver that allows your staff, especially if they're on the call taking an intake, if it's not coming over for something from lead docket and you're using Filevine for the full intake, just to save a little bit of time there. You're not limited. I can create collection items from collection items, like create them both. So for example, if you work with liens, sometimes you could create a lien straight from a medical item. And again, save time and not having to duplicate the provider every time. I know that was a pretty quick automation run. Any questions about that while I grab a sip of water?
None of
Perfect.
Q&A.
Thanks, Jasmine. Okay, so let's then dive into some of this. So I'm going to stop automation, edit it. That's one of the things that I love about Workato. You can't just make changes on the fly to an automation that's running in your environment. You're going to have to stop it first and then edit. So my recommendation is if you have to change or edit an automation, to wait till the end of the day or sometimes like really early in the day if you know before people get in and start running it. I do this same thing if people are adding fields or like renaming a whole section. Sometimes I'll just go in there and refresh at the end of the day to make sure the automation picks up those new changes. That way you don't have to worry about stopping an automation in the middle of the day and then having people come to you and say, hey, I was running it during this time and nothing was working and it was because you were making edits. Jasmine knows we have some automations internally here, and Susie will normally put out a whole PSA, stop, don't do any work here. You know, it's not going to work. I'm bringing down the automation for a second to make a change. So that's always a possibility too. If you need to make a change immediately, just let everyone know. Similarly to not being able to edit an automation, you also can't delete one that's running. So you don't have to worry if you're new in Workato or you're inviting somebody new into your environment about accidentally deleting a live automation. It's just grayed out. It won't let you do that. Okay, so let's look at some of these steps because I think that there's some examples of different things that you can do here. So one of the things that I'll talk about is this loop. Loops can be a little tricky to understand, but when you're thinking through automation in your organization, if you know you're going to be working with a set of data, then you're going to probably need a loop, right? And what do I mean by a set of data? In this case, it is my person list, because this can contain one contact, it could contain 10 or 12, right? So I need to say, hey, it's not just one, I need you to loop through this whole list and take this action. In this case, that action being creating the collection item. Loops can be tricky to troubleshoot, right? You're working with multiple items there. It could be one problem item. So just keep in mind that they can be kind of more on the difficult end of automations, but they're really useful if you need to loop through a whole collection section and get information from each item, or maybe like tally up an amount from each item. Your loop's going to be your best friend. Another thing that is so important, because I get asked this all the time, right? You know, I have multiple case types, or maybe I only want an automation to happen if a field is filled out or if a field is empty. So we have what's called an if condition here. These are so great to introduce to your automations because, again, you can save on tasks. If it doesn't need to check for something, or if it doesn't need to go through each step every time, if it's easier for it to just kind of take a look and see if a certain condition is met, awesome. If it is, it does the automation. If it's not, it just goes to the end of your automation and stops. So I could do something here, right? I've gotten my intake data in step 3. I could do something like incident type equals, let me use a real life example here, dog bite, right? And maybe I have a section where I keep data on dog bite and I want to turn that section on. Maybe I have a field that's filled out, you know, animal involved, yes or no, and I want to update that field to yes. You know, doesn't have to be those are just examples. But conditional statements are so helpful in your automation, and it really allows you to do quite a few things. You can see that I knew I needed to use equals in that case, but you can do contains, starts, ends, doesn't contain. I use is present or is not present. This is if you know you're looking for if a field is filled out or not. These really help. And then if you're working with numeric values, you can use, you know, greater or less than. If you're working with yes, no fields, is it true? Is it not true? So if you're, getting ideas uh, from this session, or if you're just kind of right at the beginning of choosing your automations, or dipping your toe into Workato, coming in here to see if you need a conditional is a really good kind of starting point there. All right. Any questions? No, we've got a quiet bunch taking it all in. I love it. I know too, I'm the same way. I know when I did my first Workato training, it was so much information. And then I hopped in to start using it and build something for a client and had a brief moment of, oh my gosh, did I just pick the totally wrong team? This is so much information and stuff I'll never remember. But yes, so let's take a look at some other things, tips that we definitely should be aware of in our automations. So one thing that I want to show, and actually let me get rid of some of this. Oops. So I can delete steps. One thing too I want to point out are these step notes. This is kind of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning with just organization, best practices. These notes, which I have on all of the ones here, are really, really helpful and important. Um, I was working with a client. We had the kind of setup where I'm sort of riding along with her and helping her build automation. But she mentioned that these notes were helpful because she'd go in and work on an automation and then maybe come back to it 3 weeks later, um, when she had the time. But by then you kind of like forget what each step is and like what order they go in. So this is really great because it'll tell you what each step is, what the trigger is. Instead of it just saying get details of form, it'll tell you which form. And you can add these or edit them by just editing comment up at the top here. This is one of those things too that I always tell people, it's like a little bit of work up front. You have to remember after you create each step to add the note, but it saves so much time. Again, if you're tag teaming these with a coworker and they build one, you can just go in and see what they built without having to click into each step. And I can also copy steps from the same menu as well. You can delete them, but copying is really important because it saves time. If I know I need to get a different form, right? This is intake. I'll show you once that loads in a second. I can copy this and then just switch out whichever section it is, from intake to litigation or something, for example. Let me flip back to my demo. So in our update step here, right, which is a really common, if you're mirroring data, if you're putting data into a section, you're going to be using an update step. Let me just use that. One thing that I do want to show, because I think it gets overlooked a lot, I'm just going to use a notes field, is this formula mode. So a lot of times people are just kind of copying information, right? They might be pulling information from a previous step and just copying it. But Workato opens up kind of a whole new world of like data manipulation with their formula mode. And you can do things like turning, here, let me actually get a form just so we can see a better example of this. Let's have this be probably an intake or maybe case summary. I can do things like, again, I use formula mode when I'm calculating SOLs because I need to say, hey, add 2 years to this date or add 6 months if it's a government claim to this date. I can do all of that with my formula mode. And, right. So I could say something like due date, and then Workato is going to ask for this a certain way. I'm going to show you a really great resource in a second, but you could do something like, if I needed to format this, there's a way to format dates. I could do plus 2 years, right? All sorts of different formulas, options, ways to kind of manipulate or transform data. And if you are looking for just more information on this, Workato has, well, I should back up a second. Workato has a whole docs section or a whole docs like support page, docs.workato.com, which I'm gonna pop into the chat as well in case anyone wanted to check that out. Um, this is where you can kind of look up certain things if you're trying to learn how to create a step, a trigger, if you want to learn more about the operations. Jasmine and I are racing each other towards it in the chat. But that's where you can find all of that. But I would recommend, if you are someone that works frequently in Workato, just favoriting this page, especially like number formulas, right? It's going to tell you to add, subtract. You can see on the end if something is blank, if it's an even number, an odd number, and then date formulas. You can get the time and date. You can, add years. You can convert to different time zones. There's so many things that you can do with formulas in Workato. It can be a little bit overwhelming, and it can be a little bit hard to remember the exact formula, right? Where it has like the period, to underscore date. Workato will try to help you, as you saw when I started to add mine, right? It's going to give me a list of different things that I can do. But sometimes it's just helpful to have a full comprehensive list. I love this one, and there's also some frequently asked questions underneath there. And this is super useful too, because it will tell you how much or what the result will look like. I use this one all the time. So many times I get asked, hey, I just want a timestamp automation. When my intake section is saved or when my case summary section is saved, I want the name of the person who made that save and the date that they made that save. Instead of doing some kind of crazy thing where I'm storing the date, I can just say, great, I'm going to update that form when it gets saved, and I want the date to be today. That's all I have to do to get that day's date and the timestamp information there. So that can save a ton of time with these formulas, instead of trying to think through, how do I store this in FileVine, or how do I do this within FileVine. Sometimes there's so much power just in Workato itself. I'm going to go, depending on, if we have questions or not, I'm going to go into some other resources that are within your Workato environment already that you might not be aware of or overlooked. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about testing automations, right? So as we talked about, you always want your project ID. And I should say, you should have this test project ID on there until you've tested it. Maybe you've had somebody else test it, and you're sure that your automation is working. When you're ready to turn the automation across, like live across your whole org, all you have to do is come in here and hit this delete button. So that's why I like this a lot, because it's super easy to add or remove. And it really just kind of helps you, again, be more comfortable as you're testing your automation. This one we already tested live, but let's pretend, just for the sake of this session today, that I just built this and I want to see if it works. So let's reset some stuff here. And I'll do some more. Sure, let's do 2 different ones, just so I know that it worked from my. Now, the first time, Workato is divided into this recipe, right? This is like the builder and then the test section. So when you're ready to test for the first time, you're going to come in here. If it's the first time, it knows I've tested this before, so that's why it looks like this. If it's the first time you've never tested it, you're just going to have a big blue button that says click here to test recipe. What's important, and this can take people like a little bit to get used to, is one, you need to go and actually do your trigger action. So you're going to have, sometimes if you work on dual monitors, this can be helpful. You'll want your test project up in one window and the automation up in another, so you can quickly flip back and forth between them. And then you'll just keep in mind that you're actually doing the automation, right? I've gotten asked once before, like, oh, I just ran a test and it ran in like a bunch of projects. Now, how do I undo that test? And it's like, unfortunately, you can't, right? So you're actually taking the action of your automation when you test. If you're in a test project, right? Who cares if it messes up? You just run another test. But again, just make sure that you are prepared for that to actually happen. So I'm going to go ahead and hit test recipes so we can see what this looks like. And then it's ready. And then I would just go to my test project and hit that. So it's a little bit of like a song and dance. The first time I'm going to show you a tip for how you don't have to do that if you're testing multiple times. So you don't have to flip back and forth every time. And then Workato will tell you whether or not it's successful. You're always going to want to check in FileVine first, just because Workato said it's successful. It just means it didn't hit any errors. It might not have like done exactly what you wanted to do. So always double check in FileVine. And my recommendation too would just be to have somebody trusted on your side to also test the automation. It could be a coworker, it could be a trusted admin or paralegal, somebody that's actually going to be using the automation. Um, have them take a look at it in the test project and say, does this make sense? Is this what we want to happen? But I can see that it added my other two just from that test. Again, not from it being on. So just make sure you're prepared for that when you're testing your automation. And from my test too, right? Again, I can actually see all of the details. I can see the different information in my intake section, for example. This is in what's called JSON format. So here's how you can troubleshoot if you're like, why didn't that work? You can come into these steps, you can see the input, um, and then what is actually in each section or what each action output. Now you'll notice up at the top here, I have this repeat job. So this is, if you're running multiple tests, maybe it wasn't perfect on the first try. None of us are perfect. I've definitely run a test and had something mess up before and have to run another one. Instead of hopping back over there, doing another test recipe, I can just click repeat job. Then I'll show you what happens there. And I don't have to push the button again. It's just going to say, cool, I'll use whatever you did the first time for the trigger, and we'll just reuse that. So now I should see those items duplicated here. Yep, and there they are, because I just repeated that job. So that saves you a little bit of time in testing as well. All right. I'm going to wrap up on those tools I mentioned a little while earlier that are inside of your Workato environment that you should definitely be taking advantage of if you aren't already. So we're going to come back to this sidebar here. And one thing too, if you are a Workato user and you've been a user longer than, I don't know, a month, this might look a little bit different. Workato did do a UI update recently. I'm holding out hope that they make this text here a little bit lighter. I was squinting at my screen the other night, but just keep in mind that Workato, like FileVine, can change its interface. Sometimes it moves things around or changes the color of things on the side. So if you haven't been in Workato in a while and you think you know where everything is, just take a look at my screen because it might have changed from the recent update. So two things I'm going to call out here. The first one is the environment properties. This I think I mentioned in that little tip video that was released earlier. But if you see here, I'm what's called hard coding the project ID, right? I'm copy and pasting it in here. And this can be a little bit annoying. One, if I decide to use a different test project ID and I had it in multiple automations, I'm going to have to update every one of those automations. Also, I'm going to have to like remember this number or always pull this up first at the same time, even if I just want to quickly check something. If you store this in an environment property, do this. Let's do free help test projects. Now I don't have to remember what number that is. I don't have to remember, the project ID itself. And I'm just going to come in here and do a quick save, refresh. So instead of using that number in my recipe data underneath properties, I can just pull that in. And it's almost like a little variable. I use these for test project IDs. I use them for phase IDs, contact IDs, their project type IDs. There are a ton of things within FileVine that have unique ID numbers that aren't exposed on the front end, right? So every one of your phases has a unique number assigned to it. You can't see that. You normally have to run a like get phase list call to find it. But you don't have to remember it every single time if you're trying to use, anytime the phase changes and you're using that in 4 different automations, it's easier to just say, hey, my litigation phase ID is this, and you can store it in one of these environment properties. Awesome. And then the other thing that I just want to show as well is in that same tools section, right underneath, or 2 down, I should say, from environment properties is lookup tables. And these are really, really, we have a ton again here in our sandbox. Let me see if I have any that might be useful. Let's just do contacts. It's a crazy one. Let's see. Let me just create a new one so we can see. You can think of these, they're almost like spreadsheets, right? So instead of trying to connect something to a Google Sheet, you're introducing another connection. It can run a little bit slower sometimes. You can use what's called a lookup table. And let's say I could have one column that's like a project ID, and maybe this is like a field value, right? Case type. So if I'm trying to like input a bunch of information, say I have a spreadsheet or I've run a report in FileVine and I'm like, great, this is the information I need to just like go in and add to my project. I can have this all loaded into a lookup table. You get 10 columns across and you can do thousands of entries in these. And then in my automations, pop back to demo. I can use lookup tables. And it's just built in. This is just available to me because you have Workato. So I could, get all the entries. I could search, I use this a lot. Let me just pick an example one. I could search on a certain thing. I use this for section toggles. If I'm like toggling on sections on a certain case type, I can do that. And then I can use that loop that I mentioned and just say, hey, for every single item in that lookup table, update a form, post a note on the project. So it's kind of like taking mass updates one step further. If a mass update in FileVine isn't working for you, or if you're getting data from like a third party that you need to put into FileVine, sometimes lookup tables can work a little bit better than like Google Sheets. Again, that connection is like an extra connection. It's an extra step. Lookup tables are nice and easy and they stay within Workato. So check those out. Again, just on your toolbar, you have the environment properties and lookup tables. Maybe you don't need to add a bunch of them right now. Maybe it's something you just want to start thinking about how they could be used in your automations. Awesome. I think that is all I have for you folks today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Frances. You're always a wealth of knowledge. Hopefully you all learned something new today. As I mentioned earlier, if you do want to take advantage of any of VineSkill's services, we run the gamut on all things FileVine. Feel free to reach out to us. I put my email and Frances's email in the chat. This again will be up on our website. Hopefully you all will join us for a future free help session. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and thanks again, Frances.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks all.